The streets of Newcastle hadn't seen a takeover party like this since the city last won a major trophy, and that was 1955. Inside a Saudi government building 3,000 miles away, a man named Yasir Al-Rumayyan signed the paperwork that made it happen, while also serving as chairman of the world's largest oil company. One country, one man, one football club, and one question nobody in the celebrating crowd outside St. James's Park was asking. Why does an oil-rich kingdom that has never needed English football for a single dollar of revenue want to own a Premier League club at all? This isn't a story about a rich buyer falling in love with a sleeping giant. It's not really a story about football at all. It's a story about an economy with an expiration date and a kingdom racing to replace it before the world stops needing what it sells. Football is the visible part. The part with highlight reels and transfer windows and Cristiano Ronaldo's face on every back page. But underneath the visible part is a financial machine worth over $1 trillion, a national strategy with a hard 2030 deadline, and a calculated bet that owning the world's most popular sport can buy something money alone cannot. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly what that bet is, and why, by 2026, some of the people who placed it have started quietly pulling their chips back off the table. To understand why Saudi Arabia wanted a football club in northeast England, you have to go back further than any transfer announcement, to a single, uncomfortable number. Roughly 90% of Saudi Arabia's government revenue, for most of the last century, has come from one thing: oil. That's not diversification. That's dependency. And dependency on a single commodity is a dangerous position for any nation, especially one whose population is young, whose ambitions are growing, and whose product, oil, the entire planet is actively trying to use less of. In 2016, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman put a name on the plan to fix this, Vision 2030. The pitch was simple to state and almost impossibly hard to execute. Build an economy that doesn't need oil. Build industries from scratch: tourism, entertainment, technology, logistics, fast enough to matter before global demand for crude starts permanently declining. But here's the problem nobody likes to say out loud. You cannot build a tourism industry, an entertainment industry, or a global reputation as a modern economic power from a standing start. Not in a decade. Not with money alone. What you can do, if you have enough capital, is buy attention. And there is no industry on earth that manufactures attention more efficiently, more cheaply, or more globally than football. Roughly half the planet's population watches football. Not casually follows, actively watches. No tourism campaign, no government advertisement, no diplomatic summit reaches that many people, that consistently, with that much emotional investment. That's the part most football fans miss entirely. Saudi Arabia didn't fall in love with football. Saudi Arabia identified football as the most efficient marketing channel in human history, and then built a financial vehicle large enough to buy a seat at the table. That vehicle has a name. It's called the Public Investment Fund, PIF for short, and if you've never heard of a sovereign wealth fund before, here's the simplest way to understand one. Imagine a country doesn't spend all the money it earns. Instead of letting that surplus sit in a bank account doing nothing, the government creates an investment fund, owned entirely by the state, and uses it to buy assets all over the world. Real estate. Technology companies. Airports. Video game studios. Football clubs. Norway has one. So does Singapore. So does China. It's not unusual for oil-producing nations specifically to build these funds, because oil revenue is volatile, and a sovereign wealth fund is how you turn a temporary windfall into a permanent source of national income. What makes PIF different isn't the concept. It's the scale and the speed. In 2015, PIF managed around $150 billion. By the end of 2024, that number had crossed $900 billion. By mid-2026, PIF had climbed to roughly $1.15 trillion in assets under management, making it the fifth largest sovereign wealth fund on the planet. That's not steady growth. That's a fund that grew nearly eightfold in a decade, under the direct chairmanship of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman himself. And here's the detail that explains everything that follows: PIF doesn't behave like a normal investor chasing the highest return. It behaves like a state development tool with a deadline. Roughly 80% of its assets stay inside Saudi Arabia, funding the giga projects and new industries the Vision 2030 plan depends on. The remaining slice goes abroad, strategically, deliberately, to assets that buy something more valuable than financial return. They buy visibility. This is where you need to understand the difference between sponsoring a football club and owning one, because they are not the same instrument at all. A sponsor rents a logo. Their name appears on a shirt for a season, maybe two, and then the relationship ends or gets renegotiated. It's advertising. Temporary. Transactional. An owner controls the asset permanently. They control the brand, the global media coverage, the boardroom decisions, the relationships with leagues and broadcasters and other clubs. When PIF bought 80%, later increased to 85%, of Newcastle United, they didn't rent attention. They bought a permanent seat inside one of the most watched sporting competitions on earth. That distinction is the entire blueprint. When the deal closed in October 2021, the headline price was around £300 million, pocket change by the standards of a trillion-dollar fund. For context, that's less than some clubs spend rebuilding a single squad in one transfer window. But here's what almost nobody noticed at the time. The price wasn't the point. The approval was. The takeover took 18 months to clear the Premier League's owners and directors test, a process built to determine whether prospective owners are fit to control a football club. The sticking point wasn't money. It was a question with enormous geopolitical weight: was PIF truly independent from the Saudi government, or was this, in effect, a state buying a stake in English football? The deal only closed after the consortium provided what the Premier League called legally binding assurances that the Saudi state would not directly control the club, even though PIF's own chairman is the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, and PIF's governor, Yasir Al-Rumayyan, simultaneously chairs Saudi Aramco, the state oil company. That approval mattered more than any trophy Newcastle could ever win. It meant a Saudi state-linked entity now had a permanent, sanctioned presence inside the world's most watched football league, broadcast into more than 180 countries, generating billions of media impressions a season, completely independent of how the team actually performs on the pitch. Newcastle's job, in this strategy, was never really to win the league. Newcastle's job was to exist, visibly, permanently, respectably, inside the institution football fans trust the most. But owning one club inside someone else's league was only the first move. The second move was building an entire league of their own. In January 2023, Cristiano Ronaldo signed for Al Nassr, and the entire global conversation about Saudi football shifted overnight. His contract reportedly paid him in the region of $200 million a year, making him, by a wide margin, the highest-paid footballer in history. To football fans, it looked like a retirement deal for an aging superstar. To the architects of Vision 2030, it was something else entirely: proof of concept. Here's the part that's easy to miss: Ronaldo wasn't really being bought for his 90 minutes on the pitch. He was being bought as a billboard. Every camera that followed him, every back page that ran his face, every highlight clip that crossed a feed in Lagos or Manila or Sao Paulo carried the Saudi Pro League's name along with it. And it worked exactly as designed. Within 2 years, the dominoes fell. Karim Benzema to Al Ittihad. Neymar to Al Hilal, in a deal reportedly worth $90 million in transfer fees plus a $100 million annual salary. N'Golo Kanté. Riyad Mahrez. Roberto Firmino. Sadio Mane. In the summer of 2023 alone, Saudi Pro League clubs spent more than $950 million on transfers, second in the entire world only to the Premier League itself. By the end of 2025, total spending on foreign talent since the project began had crossed an estimated $3 billion, transfer fees and salaries combined. The financial machine behind this wasn't subtle, either. PIF owns four of the league's biggest clubs directly: Al Hilal, Al Nassr, Al Ittihad, and Al Ahly. So when those clubs sign superstar players, the fund isn't competing in a free market against rival bidders the way Manchester City or PSG do. It's allocating sovereign capital to its own portfolio companies, and counting the global attention as the return. But the players were never really the product. They were the delivery mechanism. Here's the part that almost nobody connects, because each story gets covered in isolation. Saudi Arabia didn't just buy football. In the same stretch of years, PIF poured billions into LIV Golf, merging it with the PGA Tour in a deal that stunned the golf world. It brought Formula One racing to the streets of Jeddah. It hosted some of the biggest heavyweight boxing matches of the decade. It built Savvy Games Group and, in 2025, led a $55 billion buyout of Electronic Arts, the largest leveraged buyout in financial history, taking the maker of EA Sports FC and Madden private. That's not a series of unrelated purchases. That's a single strategy, repeated across every major global sport simultaneously. Economists and political analysts have a name for this strategy: sportswashing, using high-profile sporting investment to reshape a country's global image, often to draw attention away from human rights criticism. Critics point to exactly that. Saudi Arabia continues to face international scrutiny over restrictions on free speech, treatment of women's and LGBTQ+ rights, and most notably the 2018 killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, an event the United States government determined was ordered by the Crown Prince himself. Human rights organizations including Amnesty International have repeatedly called on the Premier League and other governing bodies to factor human rights records into ownership approvals. Supporters of the strategy argue the framing is selective, that state and state-linked money already runs through huge parts of global football, from Gulf-owned clubs in Manchester and Paris to broadcasters and sponsors with their own governments attached, and that singling out Saudi investment ignores how the rest of the industry already works. What's not in dispute is the function the spending serves. It isn't really about football results. It's about being talked about, written about, watched, and normalized, at a scale that no embassy or advertising campaign could ever buy. Every time a major outlet runs a Ronaldo or Neymar headline with Saudi Arabia in it, the country accumulates something it cannot purchase any other way: familiarity. And familiarity, over enough time, becomes legitimacy. So does it actually deliver what it's designed to deliver? The honest answer, by 2026, is partially and unevenly. On the success side, the numbers are real. The Saudi Pro League's broadcast deals and sponsorship value rose sharply once the marquee signings began. Newcastle's commercial revenue jumped substantially under PIF ownership, and the club qualified for the Champions League, competing against Paris Saint-Germain, a result that would have seemed unthinkable a few years earlier. Global media coverage of Saudi football, by any measure, multiplied many times over. International audiences who had never watched a Saudi Pro League match before were suddenly tuning in to see Ronaldo, Benzema, or Neymar play. On the failure side, the picture gets considerably more complicated. Several marquee signings turned out to be commercial disasters. Neymar, who joined Al Hilal for a $90 million fee plus a reported $100 million annual salary, played just 7 matches across 18 months before his contract was effectively torn up in early 2025. His market value collapsed from roughly €75 million to €15 million in that span, one of the steepest value drops of any player in the world during that period. He wasn't alone. Transfermarkt data through 2025 showed that virtually every one of the league's most valuable foreign signings lost market value after arriving, Sadio Mane, Joao Cancelo, and others among them. No club outside Saudi Arabia has paid significant money to re-sign a player out of the league. The traffic, in other words, has been almost entirely one-directional. Stadiums, too, haven't matched the ambition of the project. Despite the star power on the pitch, attendance at many Saudi Pro League matches has remained modest by the standards of Europe's top leagues, a gap that money alone hasn't closed. And this is where the story gets genuinely uncertain, because by late 2025 and into 2026, the spending itself started to change. Saudi Arabia's 2025 budget forecast a deficit of roughly $27 billion, prompting the IMF to lower its growth outlook for the kingdom. Around the same period, the Saudi Pro League's winter transfer window told a strikingly different story than the one the world had gotten used to. Instead of marquee superstar arrivals, the headlines were dominated by departures, Neymar's contract effectively cancelled, manager exits, and a wave of younger, far cheaper signings replacing the aging Galacticos of 2023. One winter window that had been rumored to include a $300 million bid for Vinicius Jr. closed with the league's single biggest fee sitting at roughly $25 million. The era of nine-figure marquee transfers, at least for now, has cooled considerably. This matters because it exposes the central tension at the heart of the entire project. PAF has publicly committed to a target of $2 trillion in assets under management by 2030, more than double its current size, and its 2026 to 2030 strategy, approved earlier this year, explicitly emphasizes financial discipline and capital efficiency. Football's role within that strategy is being recalibrated, not abandoned. There are deeper structural questions too. Can a domestic football culture genuinely develop when the league's biggest stars are imported, aging, and financially insulated from normal market pressure? What happens to the Saudi Pro League's global relevance if the marquee names retire and aren't replaced at the same scale? And perhaps most fundamentally, if oil revenue itself declines faster than Vision 2030's other industries can mature, does a $1 trillion fund still have the appetite to keep subsidizing attention at this price? None of these questions have settled answers yet. That's precisely the point. Saudi Arabia never needed football to survive. It needed the world's attention to survive what comes after oil, and football turned out to be the fastest, most efficient way to rent that attention at global scale. For a few years, the price of that attention was almost unlimited. Ronaldo, Neymar, Benzema, Newcastle. Numbers large enough to dominate every back page on Earth. But trillion-dollar funds still answer to budgets. And by 2026, the same machine that built this strategy has started asking the question every empire eventually asks of its own ambitions, not can we afford this, but for how much longer? Saudi Arabia isn't buying football. It's renting the world's eyes for as long as the bill stays one the kingdom is willing to pay. Whether that bill comes due before Vision 2030 finishes building what comes next is a question the next transfer window won't answer. Only time will.